All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's class. We're talking about fall bulbs today with Peg. I'm just going to give it a little bit while we wait for everybody to log in. We're expecting a big crowd today. So as I watched the participant numbers go up, just a few notes for those of you who are new to these calls. This is a webinar format, so we can't actually see you or hear you during this call. It's a little bit different than a Zoom meeting. If you have questions during the class, type those questions into the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that, and then when Peg's ready to take questions, I'll be relaying those to her so that she can answer those questions. We are recording today, so we will be following up after the class with a link to the recording. If anybody has to leave early for any reason, just know we have the class for you so you can catch up later. And I think that about covers it. Please do let me know if you have any issues during the call. I'll be happy to help you. And I think that about covers it. Peg, I love this topic. It's something I just learn more about every single time you talk about it. I learn more. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Peg, she works at our Fair Oaks store in our annuals department, but has experience in all areas of gardening, draws a lot from her own experience. And I just look forward to hearing from Peg every time she's on. So Peg, thank you as always for joining us and for covering this topic on bulbs.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you all for watching this afternoon. It is a beautiful afternoon, and we have good moisture in the ground. And now, going into winter, we're not ready for winter yet, but it's good to have some moisture in the ground. Thank God it was the right amount, okay? We are talking about bulbs today. And I really have a lot to say about bulbs because I've been planting them for many, many years. I think among the first bulbs that I planted in mass were when I had a couple of babies running around, and I'm madly planting these bulbs, and my husband comes home from work and he says, "Hun, how much did you spend on those?" And I said, "But I don't drink beer." Justification. Okay, justify a few bulbs to go into the ground this fall. All righty, Benny, let's bring up that first photo, okay? We've got a lot of photos today, and we'll be moving through them pretty quickly. I obviously have a love affair with bulbs, okay? And I loved this picture. I've used it a lot, really. But yes, it is a love affair until it isn't. And that is when the large bulb's foliage begins to mature. But throughout this class today, we're going to talk about that. Now, since I have a lot of pictures, I'm going to move through them pretty quickly. And they are to some degree a little chronological, but let's go to the next one, Danny, okay? Among the first ones to come into bloom, and often in December, and usually they will bloom into February and March, depending upon the weather, and that's Galanthus, Galanthus. They are small bulbs. They are fantastic at naturalizing beneath the deciduous trees. These have really naturalized in a large area underneath crepe myrtle and a winterberry and dogwood, and they do reseed. Don't mulch too heavily. After they go out of bloom, let those little seed blossoms mature, and they will seed around nicely, okay? So Galanthus, among the first, okay? Again now, okay. All right, we're going to talk about some of these small bulbs first. There's some beauties out there, and I love them because their foliage disappears pretty quickly, and it isn't annoying while it is producing next year's bulb, you need to leave this foliage up because that is what makes next year's bulb. Again, this is a small bulb. It's wonderful in mass. It likewise reseeds. And this is along one of my pathways in the wooded area. And it is Scilla, S-C-I-L-L-A. And I absolutely love it. There is any number of small, which we used to call minor bulbs, but they're anything but minor. I think they were called that because they're so small. And you can afford to plant these in masses. And before long, you'll have something like this. They even seed over into my gravel pathways that run through the woods. Okay, Danny, we will move pretty quickly through this. All right, this is just to show you that pathway. I absolutely love the paths in my woods, and I'm very informal because it's a very informal area. In this, I put down the landscape fabric, and then I used the small 3/8 Seminole chips to cover that. And it's you can push a wheelbarrow over it. You can't push a wheelbarrow over pea gravel. The wheels sink into it, but that does not happen with this. And I love it because those bulbs actually seed into the edges of it. And so that's a fun place. Here again, these are the bulbs that thrive around particularly deciduous. Here is another of those small bulbs, and it's Pushkinia, P-U-S-C-H-K-I-N-N-A, Pushkinia. This is among the first to bloom, following, of course, which is the earliest, the Galanthus. I think it blooms a tiny bit ahead of the Scilla. And again, this is another area that is under deciduous shrubs and trees. There's viburnum in that area, more of the crepe myrtle, and this is just a mass underneath that. And so when the foliage disappears, it's just beautiful. And this one doesn't seed as heavily as some of the others, but it's still lovely. And in the next picture, this is Star of Bethlehem. It comes on much later, and this one is actually on a bank, and it has heavier foliage, but it blooms for quite a while. Now, all of these are in woodland areas or beneath small shrubs and large trees. So they get really good sunshine because most of the things are deciduous. They get enough sunshine to really thrive. They do not have to be in full sun. Okay, as far as usage is concerned, the next one, honey. Usage is concerned with a lot of these larger bulbs, the tulips, for instance, and tulips are available that will start to bloom usually in late March. There are those that come in April, they're coming in May. So you can have a long period of bloom from tulips by careful selection of varieties. This is one that blooms mid-season, and it's planted in clumps in the center of a border, a small border, and it's very much complemented by the plant in front of it, which is Brunera, the little blue blossom that you see, B-R-U-N-N-E-R-A, Brunera. And of course, it's in the background are Japanese maples, and everything looks good with the Japanese maple, I think, you know. Going into the next picture, it's growing in front of and at the edges of Pieris japonica. I love Pieris japonica. Pieris japonica does not love the hottest afternoon sun. I find that when you plant it, it will grow there, but when you plant it there in the hottest afternoon sun, it will often get spider mites and other little things, but I don't have any problems with this one because it doesn't get that hottest afternoon sun. But be sure when you plant at the edges of an evergreen that you allow enough room between them and that evergreen. Now, these are the nice thing about this is in small spaces, you can have a lot. You can have the beauty of the evergreen. You can have the beauty of the bulbs. And then you can have something else in front of the bulbs that's going to hide that foliage as it dies back. Okay. Now here is another example of an attractive plant that's underused. And again, likes some shade in the hottest afternoon. And that's Kerria, K-E-R-R-I-A, Kerria japonica. And here it's with a split corona daffodil and some blue hyacinth. Now, the beauty of those big hyacinths are that they're incredibly fragrant. And a lot of people say the split coronas don't last as well, but I have had great luck with them. I love them. They put on quite a show. And they have a wonderful color pickup with that spring blooming Kerria japonica. Another attribute of the Kerria japonica is that although it loses its leaves in the winter time, the stems are beautiful green. And so it has presence even in the winter time. Okay. And here is a little bit better picture, another angle of that same area. And there is an unusual plant near that also. I love the Fertilizers. It doesn't thrive to the degree that all of my other I'm blanking out, Danny. Helleborus, for goodness sakes. How could I? My garden's half Helleborus, I think. Okay, but this is Fertilizers, and it's rather unusual. But in that same area, there's a lot of Helleborus, which you will see a little later on. Now, I think if one asks what was my favorite, which would be difficult to name, I would have to say that it's some of the species tulips. They are far more perennial than any of the other tulips. The species tulips. Klausiana is this one. C-L-A-U-S-I-A-N-A. Klausiana. And they come in different colors. Let's come back to me for just a second, honey. When we're talking about species tulips, this is the Klausiana group here, and it does come in different colors. Now, the deer don't seem to like these for whatever reason, I don't know, and they seed themselves about nicely, okay? I love these particularly. They're wonderful, and the foliage is very fine, very thin, and not at all obnoxious. Now, here is another grouping that is also deer resistant, and they bloom a little before the Klausiana, and they're small, and they are deer resistant, and they too will reseed and are very much perennial. Okay, so you have to give up that great big bloom on the tall stem if you want to have a truly perennial tulip. But you can do it with these, and you won't find that they have obnoxious foliage to deal with, okay? And in the next picture, you can see how I even deal with some of that foliage, okay? I prepared an area a long time ago underneath 2 or 3 huge oak trees, a couple of upright Japanese maple, and a lot of native sassafras. And underneath is just masked with these small bulbs because I wanted to appreciate them for just for themselves. I have Scylla in there. I have the anemone blanda in there. I have numerous ones of those small tulips and species tulips in there. Now, what happens when they're finished or as they're blooming is there are ground cover types. What constitutes a ground cover? Anything that covers the ground. And in this case, it's Tiarella or Heucherella. The Heucherella is a cross with the Tiarella and the coral bells, but they are wonderful ground covers. They bloom in the spring. Their foliage is interesting. They're not invasive. They're mixed with various sizes of hosta and a lot of fern, but it's very satisfactory even after the bulbs go out of bloom. Okay, let's go down. All right, let's talk about another group of bulbs that I find very satisfying, and that is the miniature Narcissus. And I really, really love these. And again, you can buy early blooming, mid blooming, and late blooming within this. So you can have them for a fairly long period of time. And there's some real beauties in there. This is planted within another woodland plant. And wouldn't like the hottest afternoon sun. But this is a native, and it's Phlox stolonifera. There is another native phlox, which is in that general area, but I don't have a picture of right there, is Phlox divaricata. Phlox stolonifera, Phlox divaricata. And this is the dwarf ones blooming among it, okay? Oh, I did mention that one, that phlox. Okay, planning out your color combinations is a fun thing to do. And this is actually a close-up of the Heucherella. This one looks much more like a coral bells. But in front of that and around that, I did plant that beautiful little tulip, Clausiana. And I just really enjoy that. And it's coming up through fern. I love, and I have many varieties of fern in my garden. Okay, this is a couple of other quick pictures of the border, but it's different plants that's coming up out of. This again is the miniature Narcissus. Some might call it miniature daffodils. It's okay. They're all of the Narcissus family. And it's rising up through a geranium maculatum. This is a perennial geranium that has the most fragrant foliage. I love the foliage. And the deer don't eat it. Isn't that good? And behind it is the Phlox stolonifera. So these are the things that make these bulbs more enjoyable, is pairing them with other plants. Now, the foliage of these miniature daffodils, a miniature narcissus, is not obnoxious. It's not large, it's not heavy, it doesn't fall over everything. So here is a little closer view of those blooming. Okay, a little bit of a repetition here in the den. Okay, where do we plant the large tulips or the large daffodils? This is actually my border beside the road, and they're planted toward the center and the back of that border. Now, when you are planting your tulips, we feel, and I've had some reasonable success with this, that if you plant them a little deeper, let's say if you're told to do it 6 inches, if you do it 8 inches, they seem to perennialize a little better. And reasons why they might not come back, at least for 2 years. I usually get 2 and sometimes 3 years out of these, because they are planted in good soil that drains well and is planted deeply. Okay. A couple of reasons is, of course, some varmint might get them, and planting them 8 inches deep helps with that. They don't dig deeply as easily. And the other one is if it stays winter wet and they rot. That's another problem. Okay, so be sure that you put them in areas that's well drained, and you must watch your drainage in the winter time to observe to see, is that water draining away, because it's winter wet that will sometimes really get things. The next picture is another border. I have a number of these borders that are planted for the beauty, yes, but a great deal for diversity, for the birds, the bees, and the butterflies, and I have them in abundance, and I love it. So this is really early spring, when the very first daffodils are coming up, and most of these are daffodils that have large foliage and really falls all over everything when they're dying out, when they're turning yellow. Don't cut them off until they've turned deeply yellow, and it's best not to braid them. You can go over and reach around and move their foliage around if you want to, because there are a lot of perennials in this bed. So I am a little watchful of it to be sure that they don't swamp those perennials. In the next, excuse me, in the next picture, this is kind of what the foliage looks like. It's still there. They finished blooming. Whenever possible, I cut away the seed heads because it's better for those bulbs, particularly the tulip bulbs that you're hoping will perennialize. Now, I have so many that that's not realistic sometimes, okay? But I think I did happen to do that in this bed. Okay, you can see that there are perennials that are beginning to come, and they will pretty quickly hide that foliage when it turns yellow and matures, okay? Okay, David. I think we're moving along pretty well. Do you think so? Okay, there's another way to have tulips in particular, although any one of these bulbs can be used in this fashion. And that is at this time of the year by planting. You can even use like a 2-gallon, it would need to be that big, 2-gallon plastic container, or that's a good thing to use because you can overwinter them in groupings, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go along, container growing. But you can sit those just as they're coming into bloom within your garden to enjoy them, and then you can take them away when they're finished. And actually, I had pretty good luck this year in those 2-gallon containers. After they had finished with their blooming, I then grouped them in an area where you didn't see them, but they did get some sunshine for their foliage to mature. And I've left them in those containers. I did fertilize a couple of times. And speaking of fertilizer, which we'll talk about a little bit more, the optimum time is at planting time, when you spread it probably just above the bulbs, which is a good idea. It'll settle down and into the root system when that gets going. But a very important time to do existing bulbs is as they begin to come up in the spring. That is what they really need. That's when they can utilize fertilizer to its greatest degree. Okay, so you can use containers, or if you didn't buy them, you can put containers out that's store-bought, okay, because we do carry those in the spring. I have the great advantage of having distributed many of these into the wooded area. There's a lot of talk that you should not plant bulbs in the shade. Well, this is deciduous shade. It's primarily oak. There's some cherry, there's tulip poplar, there's a lot of dogwood, but they're all deciduous. And most of these bulbs will get plenty, because it gets dappled light throughout the day and some direct light. But most of these bulbs will actually mature well because they do get enough sunshine. Yes, full sun's fantastic. I don't have it. And they thrive. This grouping of bulbs has been in for many, many years. Now, if you do have an area, this is another love affair that I have, and that's Helleborus. That plant asks for very little. You know, they are almost completely evergreen. They retain their foliage into winter, whereupon it gets to looking a little ratty. I try to remove most of it. As you can see, there's an abundance of it. I try to remove most of that ratty looking foliage just as the blooms are emerging so that you can really enjoy those blooms. You don't have to do that. It will eventually lay down. And what a magnificent ground cover this plant is. It shades the ground so much that you have very few weeds to worry about. Now, there are clumps of daffodils within this, and beyond it, there's a lot more. But oh, what a companion plant, Helleborus. And I love a little art, simple art for me, within the garden. And this is a hypertufa sphere ball that I made, okay, mixed with Helleborus. And in the next picture, this one, it looks very, very similar to the little galanthus that I showed you in the first picture, but it's much, much bigger. It's leucojum, 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 snowflake. And it's planted with euphorbia. If you don't know the plant euphorbia, you should really go to our perennial section and look it over, because there's several different varieties and they really are very attractive. Here again, this one makes a good ground cover. It is very easy to remove if it goes too close to another perennial or begins to take over. I don't call it invasive. I don't call this kind of thing invasive if it's easy to remove. And this is. And it is just magnificent back in that area where I have the Helleborus. Now, you're looking at large areas. Everybody doesn't have a large area, and I know that. So you have to make some choices. But if you enjoy shrubs that bloom in the spring, or some of those in the fall, this is a wonderful group of plants to plant around them. And in the case of bulbs, in the edges of them, so that it comes up through them, really. So you can really have a lot of this kind of thing, even in small spaces. You can. Okay, here's another little bulb that falls in place with those minor bulbs, and I feel is very underused. There are a lot of anemone plants. There are these little bulbs that bloom in the spring. There's the perennial plants that bloom later on, and those that bloom even in the late fall. All very different, but this one is a bulb. And it's anemone, A-N-E-M-O-N-E, anemone blenda, B-L-A-N-D-A, anemone blenda. Let's see if I can, did I bring, yes, I did. Come back to me for a minute, Danny. All right. First comes the snowflake. Tiny bulbs, okay. Then comes Bacilla. I don't have a Pushkinia up here, which I showed you earlier. Then comes probably, this one's the white anemone. There are a number of the dwarfiform miniature daffodils, narcissus, as you wish, and also the species tulips. These are fantastic and frequently underused. You can have a love affair with these and not have a love-hate relationship when they begin to mature. There's a big difference there. Okay, Danny, we'll go back to the next one. This one, again, multiplies pretty quickly if it's happy. Grows in sun or shade, part shade. And you can even see some of the white anemones between this planting and some of the narcissus beyond. This one blooms prolifically. It seeds a bit. And while it has deer resistant on it, I wonder, I'm going to look at this tag and see if this one says that. It is fragrant also. A lot of them say deer resistant, but it looks to me like this one does not. Okay. I have never known them, the deer, to eat the flowers, but the foliage is unusual because it comes up in the fall. So the sooner you get these in the ground, the better. Although, even if you plant it a month from now, they'll still come up. But you'll get that foliage in the fall. But the deer will munch the foliage. And anytime you lose all the foliage, you're going to lose some of the vigor of that bulb. So to say that it's deer resistant isn't quite right. Okay. Not for me anyway. Okay, then let's see what else. All right. This I wanted you to see because we just talked about that grouping of bulbs that's planted all in this area. I found this to be very satisfying. And I think it could be very satisfying and actually pretty low maintenance in a small garden. You can have those bulbs. And then you have the tiarella, the heucherella, various sizes of hosta, a lot of Christmas fern, which is evergreen, by the way. There's also some of the small grasses in there, some of the carex. So there is a lot of diversity here. As I said to you earlier, this is beneath large oak trees, sassafras, dogwood. So I get a lot of bang for my buck in that bed. I really do. It's most enjoyable. Yes, here is a bulb that's underplanted. I'm not sure that the purple allium in the back is underplanted. Some of the varieties may be, but I think everybody has a love affair with allium. They're beautiful. And when they dry, now their foliage is not a problem, I accept. The foliage can look a little ratty when the bulb comes into bloom. So I suggest that you plant this to the middle of the back of the border so that some of those perennials or other things erupting out of the ground at this time of the year, at that time of the year, will hide the foliage. It's not very heavy and it's not very noticeable. But that's when that foliage goes down. And then you're left with these tall stalks of allium. And if you let them dry in place, they're still attractive. You can even spray them purple and they still look good. I'm not so into artificial, but I've done it. Okay, in front of that are Dutch iris. And that is a really beautiful, beautiful plant. Makes a great, great cut flower. And the following picture was when I had the greatest luck with reseeding foxglove, which is a biennial. And if it's planted in late summer, I'm looking forward to next spring because I really shook those seeds of those foxglove all around in my flower beds, and I got hundreds of little ones. So I'm expecting this kind of look next year, okay? I'm not lucky enough to get it every year because I don't always plan that well, okay? Foxglove with allium. And there's several of the large sizes that are very attractive. But I'll tell you, I wanted to pull a chair up and sit down next to that because it was so rewarding. Now, in the next picture, that's leucojum. Again, the larger than life than the calanthus, which I think I showed you one earlier, but it is beneath a dogwood and a Japanese maple. So I'm suggesting that you go to our extensive, there we go, our extensive collection and choices of bulbs. I love this large cap one. Okay, when you're planting them, it's better if you plant them like 5s, 7s, 9s, whatever, in groupings because they show really well. Now, in 3, 4, 5 years, you may need to dig and divide those. This one says it's time for you to divide me. And so the optimum time to do that is when they're going yellow. The foliage goes yellow. Because now you know where it is. You're not going to dig into it. I've done that plenty of times and so aggravated when it happens. But that's the time to do it. Not only is it good for that clump, but it's also good for where you're going to put the extras. Because you're going to either replant some in your garden or you're going to give them to friends. Now, another grouping, those are the large ones, okay? Another grouping that I find very satisfactory is this beautiful white one. And I believe that one's named Jenny, okay? But if we'll come back to me for a second, I love some of the blends that we have this year. We've always had blends, but I think we've got more this year than we had before. And what they've done with this one is put several of the whites in one package. Now they're going to bloom at slightly different times, but that's a fun thing to do, particularly if you like to use a lot of white in your garden. And as far as other blends are concerned, I love it that they put some of these blends together. I'm very fond of orange, particularly if I can pair it with purple or blue. Okay, that would be pretty with that iris, wouldn't it? I think so. Oh, there's another one I wanted to talk to you about. It's a fringed tulip. I don't know that I brought that one up here. Well, I'll tell you about it. But is it back here? Oh, yes. Thank you, Danny. Oh, he's so helpful.
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome.
This is called a fringed tulip. And it may not look too inviting to you in this package, but I'll tell you, the first time that I planted this, I was so excited. It was just beautiful. So if you've never tried these fringed tulips, give them a try this year. I really, really like them. Okay, we got to move on. I got to talk about some of these other things, Danny. All right, another big one. We're going to be going through these fairly quickly. This is highly underplanted. It is, the name is huge. Definitely need to spell this one. NECTAROSCOR D-U-M. And as far as I know, there's not a common name. Nectaroscortum. Nectaroscortum. Excuse me. It blooms on a tall stem, and it blooms late, and it is magnificent. It's wonderful when it has a background, an evergreen background particularly. And this is growing in a dwarf variegated forsythia. But it's just a beautiful plant. Another one that's fantastic in the next picture that I love is late blooming Narcissus. It's very fragrant, very late, and its name is either geranium or cheerfulness, very doubled. I love the variegated ones. They're just great. And there's many different styles and bloom in different periods of time, but they're so attractive, particularly when the sun comes through them in the morning. And another favorite, and this one is an early bloomer, where their wings are swept back, looks like the breeze is heavy, is jet fire. But there are a couple of those too. All right, we want to talk a little bit about container growing. We won't have time for a lot of that, okay? Growing in containers is very satisfactory. You see some clay here, but what you're seeing is the 2-gallon plastic pots or similar, but not small, that I planted up in the fall, grouped in a safe place under a shrub. They would not want to be in full sunshine on a deck, okay? But I protect them by wrapping them with landscape fabric, and I always have good luck. And then I uncover them when the weather is better, and then I can tuck them into those containers, any container that I really want to. Now, in the next picture, this one you will see fairly often, is a grouping of plants that I can view from my front porch. And there is when I transitioned all my plantings for fall, which I'm doing right now, and putting in the pansies and the kale and the coral bells and all those fun things that provide interest in winter. I planted bulbs in those containers. Now, let me explain to you that none of those containers are sitting on the soil. They are on risers. And those bulbs are put in first before I plant my other plants. And now is a grand time to do that. I really don't have time to go into it too deeply. Here again, some of those same planters. And these are hyacinths that are so fragrant, complemented by that beautiful little viola that's growing there. Another great thing to do is have a cutting garden. This was in the back of my vegetable garden several years ago, and I totally enjoyed that. What else do you want to do with it? Enjoy bringing them inside. There's nothing more fun than cutting some of those beautiful branches that really bloom so early too, and combining them. Let's come back to me for a second and let's talk very quickly about fertilizers, because that's important, okay? This is all organic, if you want to go in that direction, which I choose to do. It's slow release. I use this in lieu of bone meal. This is much more balanced. And when I'm planting, it's a good idea to put a little soil over your bulbs and then sprinkle the required amount on top of that. It settles down, okay? When you're planting. Next spring, for established ones, or even for these, as those bulbs are emerging, is a time to make another application. And that is fantastic. Again, this is inorganic. Likewise, a very good fertilizer and used in the same manner. So that's how I fertilize, okay. Really, really do enjoy it. Okay, we talked about the arrangements and bringing those flowers inside. So, okay, little Clara. Okay, little Clara, we're going to go out, cut some flowers, and bring them in. So we are taking a walk in the garden. I fixed the container for her. It has a pin holder in the bottom. I have some Joyce gins, which I use all the time, which I did not let her use because they're too sharp. And so she I cut them, handed them to her, showed her how to put them in water first so that they're soaking up water until she gets them in her container. And then if she wanted it cut, she held it out for me to cut it. She put every flower in that container by herself. And this is the result. And I think you can see there were two very pleased people in that picture. All righty, Sally. I left you some times for questions.
Thank you. Little Clara, I feel like gets bigger every time I see a new photo of her.
She does, there's no doubt.
She's so cute. Okay, questions for you. Our first question, deer have feasted on every bulb I've planted to date. Are there any bulbs that will not be eaten by deer? So I know you use a lot of bob eggs, but what are your thoughts?
I use bob eggs, absolutely, and it does help. But if you miss out or you have several days of rain and can't spray when you should, it doesn't work. They will eat tulips, and they will wait until just before it opens to go. The ones that they don't eat at all are the daffodils and the narcissus. Now, I have not had them eat the species tulips, nor have I had them eat these little miniature plants like the snowdrops. But they love the tulips, the big tulips, okay? And they will eat the leaves of the great hyacinths. So you just have to avoid those big tulips, you know, or plant them in containers, protect them somewhat over the winter. And if you have a deck, you may want to wait until spring and buy them just as they're coming into bloom, which is another way to be able to enjoy them. But the deer are very aggravating, and we won't get into that. I think they're overpopulated. But anyway, that's beside the point. Okay.
Yeah.
Or
getting in touch with Andy Johnson so he can do a class on deer for us. So I know that's an issue a lot of people are dealing with. Okay, next question. We had a few people ask about this. Do we have native options for bulbs? 1. 2, are there any that are good for part or full shade? I've never gotten a question about native bulbs before.
I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little research, but I'm not sure of any here that are native. Okay. And I love native. I am very into native plants. The deer have ruined more of my native plants by rubbing. That's a big problem right now. You need to protect your prized small trees and small shrubs with some fencing or deer netting. You can actually put down some rebar and put the deer netting around it, because I literally put the 2-piece tomato cage beside a plant just 2 weeks ago, got distracted, and went back the next morning, and that plant had been obliterated. It's just very discouraging. It really is. But rubbing this time of the year, because it's hard to cover everything, you know. But do watch out for that, you know. I'm not aware of any of these bulbs up here that are native. And I love native plants, and I have a lot of them that are truly native to my garden, and a lot that I've planted. But I don't want to have just natives. I would eliminate too many things, my camellias, my azaleas, I could go on and on. But I have an equal amount of natives, okay?
Yes, yeah. Alrighty. Next question. This is a one I never thought about before. It's a good one. Peg, when the label gives a planting depth for the bulbs,
Yes.
is that the depth where the bottom of the bulb should be or the top?
The top usually. And you know, don't get overexcited about that, because they're going to come up unless you put them 2 feet deep or whatever. And when it says 2 to 3 inches, 3 and a little bit more is probably better. But it's in thinking, if you're getting specific, the top of the bulb, yes.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. When you deadhead, does it matter if you cut the stalk down to the basal foliage, or do you just snip the heads off?
You can do whatever's convenient for you.
Whatever works. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Okay, here's an issue with someone who's the squirrels are devouring their tulips. Is that kind of the same issue as the deer? They use repel. They've had limited success.
Yeah.
With the squirrels.
Planting them a little deeper helps.
Okay.
Some people use vole block, which is
Block. That's the VOLE.
VOLE, vole block, to help with that, you know.
Okay.
Mulching over them helps also. I know when I plant containers, I like to use that small gravel, at least a ½ inch on the top of my containers. It helps with watering. The soil doesn't splash out, and the squirrels don't like digging in that. So I think the same would follow true when you plant your bulbs. If you put a good inch of mulch on top of them, that would help to discourage some of the digging.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, squirrels are tough. Okay, next question. If you're planting bulbs in pots, will they be able to grow as perennials?
It depends upon the size of the pot.
Got it. Okay.
Some do better than others, but here again, I truly had done a number of them in these 2-gallon plastic containers, because they shouldn't be any smaller than that. And as I said, once I planted a number of those up, I grouped them together in a protected area where they wouldn't be unsightly. And I covered them with the landscape fabric. They all came through fine, and they were beautiful, and I was able to sit them in my containers or put them where I wanted to be. And then my intention was to go ahead and get them all into the ground. Well, that didn't happen. So I'm pretty sure I unpacked one the other day to see how it was doing, and the bulbs were nice size because I fertilized. Okay, there's a key right there, and how you treat them. And I'm going to find out which of those varieties came through and do well the second year and which did not. Okay, and 1 year is not enough to know. You know, gardening is a constant learning process. I learn something new every day, and from each other. This is one beauty of working here at this garden center. We have so many talented people, and each of us have a different side interest in that. And so we learn so much from each other. Yeah, we really do. And I love these Zooms, and I love soon that we're going to begin to have some of them in person again. Because I love to see your faces too. But I also love the fact that I'm able to reach out to more people right now. And that's not bad either, you know. Okay, I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, that was good. Okay, I'm gonna ask this one before I forget that came in. In your picture that you showed of your foxglove and your allium,
Yes.
below the allium was the little perennial with little blue flowers. What was that plant?
Brunera. B-R-U.
I was like, I've seen it. I should know it, but I can't think of the name. So, okay, Brunera.
Yeah, Bruno,
Well,
Brunera, as you wish.
All right, next question. Okay, so when you mention late blooming bulbs, how late does that mean? Are any of the bulbs we've mentioned fall blooming?
No, I didn't get into fall. I didn't bring up the fall blooming bulbs right now. There are a few down there, the colchicums, which unfortunately should have been planted over a month ago because they come quickly, okay? But the colchicums bloom in the fall, and I'm trying to think.
I haven't heard of those. That's a new one to me.
Colchicum, colchicum is close anyway. Okay, so no, I did not bring up any of the fall blooming bulbs, and there are only a few. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. If I put cardboard down now before planting the bulbs, then cover with wood chips, will it decompose in time for the bulbs to come up through it okay?
No, I would not do that.
No.
Not even newspaper. That's
Here's
one thing that I give up on.
don't put any newspaper above your bulbs either.
No.
Okay.
It might
No
not
mulch.
decompose fast enough because I do use it in the appropriate places. And you don't want to use it if you don't remember whether you've got bulbs there or not, okay? Because I don't think it's a good idea. I use several layers of newspaper, and boy, does it work for me, okay? And then I put mulch on top of it. And I might have to do that yearly, but it certainly beats pulling a whole lot of weeds, you know? But no, don't put it over your bulbs.
Okay.
That's
all right. Oh, okay. Here's a comment. Virginia bluebells are native. Are those a bulb?
It is a type of bulb, yes, but you'd have to go to the perennial section to get that.
Okay, so perennials. Okay, Virginia bluebells. Then so they're a bulb, but you got them from perennials. I didn't know that they were a bulb.
No, well, you can call it a bulb, but it's probably more a tuber, okay? And
Tuber.
Sometimes we don't have it at this time of the year. Here's what happens with that. It goes dormant.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's dormant, that is still in the pot, but who's going to believe it? You know, there's nothing to show for it, okay? So it's difficult to sell those when it doesn't have the foliage on it, okay?
Yeah, and they're so brief, but they're so beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Here's a question about fertilizing. When you fertilize existing bulbs, do you dig down or do you just spread it on top of the soil?
It's very good, unfortunately, because I have so many I've planted over the years, over many years. I frequently will pull leaves back or mulch back and sprinkle it onto the soil. But the smart thing to do would be to, with a little rake or whatever, to rake it slightly. No, I don't dig it in. It will penetrate down.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, we just have a couple more questions, so we'll wrap up. Is there any foliage from bulbs that needs to be cut back, or is it okay to just leave it all?
You need to leave the foliage until it turns deep yellow.
Yeah, until it turns.
It needs the nutrients from that green to produce next year's bulb. Okay. So don't cut it, don't braid it. You can go out and kind of guide it a little bit, which I do because I don't want it to swamp whatever perennials are coming through. It's going to hide that foliage.
Okay. Here's a comment on the squirrel digging issue. One person uses chicken wire just below mulch to keep squirrels from digging.
And that would be helpful too.
Which
would
work.
You can do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Small areas, that would be an advantage.
Pardon?
In small areas, that would be an advantage.
Yeah, small. Yeah. I had a garden bed once where someone had put landscape fabric across the entire garden bed, like 3 inches deep, and I had to go through and pull all of it up because nothing could put down roots. So definitely
that is the most annoying thing you could get into.
Yeah.
I don't recommend.
It was.
I mentioned earlier that I put down landscape fabric in my paths and then put the small stones. In that case, it happened to be the 3/8 inch Seminole chips. because it's fun. It's pleasant to walk on. It's very attractive. You can push your appliances through it, your wheelbarrow, etc. And that works really well. But I recommend using newspaper that degrades. And the ink is not a problem now because it's different than it was in the old days, okay? And then putting mulch on top of that. I do not recommend using landscape fabric under your mulch. That's going to be an absolute hate relationship at some point in the game, because the weed seeds are going to go and settle by the wind or whatever on top of it. You're going to get the weeds anyway. And then when you try to get it up, it's really hard.
It was backbreaking labor.
Yes.
I mean, it was, yeah. Okay, last question. Are there any perennial tulips?
The tulips that are most perennials are, as I said earlier, the species tulips. And they're smaller, but they are very rewarding. And I have a great many of this particular one here. I have quite a few of both, really. And the deer don't eat those. They haven't for me. They may for some people. And I tell you what, sometimes when they drop these babies in the spring, I don't think the babies care, you know. They seem to eat just about anything. But so far, so good. I haven't had them eat the species tulips. They have been much more perennial, and they're much smaller, but I really love them, okay? I do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Peg. That's the last question. We got a nice comment, and we've gotten a couple nice comments in. Someone said they enjoyed the class with a hot cup of coffee, and they thank you. Oh, thank you guys. You guys are all so sweet. All right. Yeah, someone else learned the hard way about the landscape fabric. Lots of comments coming in. Well, Peg, thank you so much. Like I said, I love this class. I learned so much having grown up in Florida. This is just a topic I did not grow up getting to enjoy bulbs. So
tulips aren't so good in Florida.
no hyacinth and crocus growing in Florida. So thank you. As Peg said, just so everybody knows, we are starting to get back to in-person classes. These are happening slowly. We're slowly scaling back up as I get in touch with our instructors and we get the team kind of remobilized. So we will be adding those as we get in touch with people, get topics scheduled. Keep an eye on your email because attendance to these will be limited. Some of them are going to be like a tour where our instructors will actually take you out and they'll discuss the same plants, but they'll actually be out among the plants so you can get right up close and personal with them. We're really excited to get back into the classroom, back into the store with you guys. So just keep an eye on your email for those. We will be adding classes as we get them scheduled. Peg specifically has one coming up. She's doing another class on bulbs, but she's got one coming up at the end of the month. So yay. But definitely looking forward to that. I know it's been a while. We will continue our online classes. So don't worry about those. If you're all about Zoom, those will continue. We'll send the recording out tomorrow along with a coupon for this class. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit reply to your email, to your confirmation email. That will come to me and I will share your questions with Peg. Or of course, feel free to come into the store, give us a call, give Peg a call. She likes hearing from you guys. I know sometimes people come into the store, I know I enjoy hearing about that. So glad we get to see, I know Peg's glad she gets to see you guys in person too. So Peg, is there anything you would like to wrap up with?
No, just get out there and do it. There's so many people that also say, oh, don't plant your tulips until November. I knock on some wood. I have never lost a tulip due to the fact that I planted them when I bought them, okay? Problem is, if you go and buy them and put them aside, you may forget. But there's every advantage to getting out while the weather is still pleasant. We've got good moisture in the ground. It's much easier to dig and get those tulips in. Plus, well, we've got a great selection. And thank you very much for watching. And I hope there was something about it that encouraged you to try something new.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We look forward. I know our teachers are looking forward to seeing some of you guys in classes. And of course, for anybody who does Zoom, we will be continuing to offer these as well. And everybody have a great afternoon. Peg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.